All right. Ready to go. It's 8 o'clock. Unless you're watching this recorded, in which case it could be any time. But if you're watching live, it is 8 o'clock, which means welcome to No BS Woodworking Tuesday Tips. And tonight, or whenever you're watching this, I'm going to talk a little bit about marking and measuring tools. I know, really gripping subject, isn't it? Hey, Leo's here, Skip's here, awesome. Hopefully you guys can hear and see me. Douglas is here. James is here. We're getting there. Dexter's here. Tim's here. Awesome. We're getting there pretty quick, I guess. Yep, crowd's building a little bit. Dave, what are you laughing at? I just started. Now's the time to laugh anyway because, you'll be sleeping any minute. Gonna take another drink here. Troy's here and see. Or see and hear. I don't know. Awesome. And John thinks all I'm going to talk about tonight is the woodpeckers board behind me. And I can do that if that's what you guys really want, but that's not what I have planned. I mean, there are some red tools scattered through here. I'm not sponsored by Woodpeckers. I do like their stuff. I think I've disclosed this before. My son, I've been friends with the owners of Woodpeckers for a very long time. I knew them through the woodworking shows. And my son worked at Woodpeckers for about 7 years. So what you see behind me, not behind you, but behind me, it's been a long day, folks, is the culmination of a massive number of birthday gifts and holiday gifts and all of that kind of stuff from a person who worked at Woodpeckers. So there you go. All right, so Wes is here. We've got the whole gang. Troy, good. All right. So I'm going to switch up my camera. I have a whole bunch of stuff here laid out in front of me. Hopefully we don't run so long that I miss part of it. If I do, we'll do another episode sometime. But I'm going to switch up my camera now. And yeah, perfect. So marking and measuring tools, and that kind of starts with the marking tools. Why is this such an important enough subject that I decided to spend a Tuesday evening talking about this stuff? And the answer is I see lots of people who come here for classes, or I see in other places for classes, or if I'm doing something for a woodworking club somewhere, that they just don't put the proper focus on using good sharp pencils or getting good, crisp, clean, accurate marks so that they can cut things to the proper size, fit joints the proper way, all of those things. So my first thing that I wanted to talk about tonight, or more importantly, the first thing I am talking about tonight, is those marking tools that everybody sort of ought to have in their shop. And the most important of those to me is the standard everyday pencil. And while I'm not necessarily trying to hawk a specific brand or anything like that, the one thing that I do want to say is the vast majority of people that I see doing woodworking tend to use pencils that are just too soft. They're using number 2 pencils because, well, that's what you used all through school, filling in those little dots on those goofy little tests that everyone takes. And The problem is a number 2 pencil leaves a lot of lead behind, but it also dulls up pretty fast. So for a long time, my pencil of choice, hopefully you guys can read that, is a number 3. So it's a pretty hard pencil. The pencil point, once I got it sharp, it stays sharp for a very long time. That is my pencil of choice. I've tried number 4s. They tend to get the graphite is so hard in them that it actually scores the fibers in most woods. So I found the number 3 to be a pretty good trade-off between hardness and durability. You can't dull a number 4. You usually just break the point. Right after regular old pencils, I move into colored pencils. Now, these are nowhere near as hard as that number 3. The points wear down rather rapidly. So if I'm doing a drawing or something like that for a project, I tend to pick 3 different colors. I have more colors here in the shop than this. I've also got silver, white, orange. I think that might be the full extent of it here, but you can see I've got a blue, a red, and a green. And the idea here is if I'm doing detail shots, detail sketches, or different views, a front view, a top view, a side view, I can draw them in different colors, and I can overlap them on my drawings so that I only have to measure certain aspects of that project one time and then transfer it to additional views. So I might do my front view in blue, my side view in red, and then my top view in green, because that way when I look at the drawing, I can discern one view from another. I have the other colors simply because if I'm going to do a sectional view, something about joinery, I might add in, a 4th or 5th color in order to make those details more prominent for when I do things. I've also got a scratch all here, which, in some cases, that's not a bad marking thing. Oh, going back to the colored pencils, like I said, they do wear down quickly, so you spend a lot more time sharpening them. I have a pretty good hand-operated sharpener here in the shop. If I'm not doing that, I'm sharpening them with chisels. I have a number of scratch-alls in the shop. Scratch-alls are great for marking holes and those kinds of things. The center of holes. I don't tend to use them as a scratch because, much like the old style marking gauges, they tend to just tear if you're scribing across the fibers. Yeah, and we'll get to marking gauges here in a little bit. And then the last thing I've got here is a marking knife. The biggest thing, you can use an X-Acto knife or a utility knife or something like that, but the main reason you would want to use a true dedicated marking knife is you'll see that it's on the edge is formed with bevels that are ground on there, and they're only ground on one side, which means if I'm marking dovetails or something where I'm transferring from one piece to another, I can lay that flat surface up against the surface that I need to transfer and scribe it that way, so that I'm not stepping off the scribed surface, making things larger or whatever in the process. Let me see where we are. What's the best? Wait a minute. Make sure. Oh, John's here also, and Doug Smith. Excellent. John wants to know, what's the best pencil sharpener? When I was a little kid, I thought pencil sharpeners were all good, but now they seem all bad. and the lead is always breaks on the rectangular Ticonderoga pencils. What's with that? Well, hey, Dave's here too. Awesome. And Vincent, great. Well, John, much like many things in this world, the quality of a lot of things has gone down. I'm going to back up my camera a little bit because I'm going to start doing some other stuff here in a minute. Oh, John's here. Awesome. So, quality doesn't continually go up on most mass-produced items, certainly not in this country. Hopefully, we'll get back to that pride in our work kind of a thing someday. So I have an X-Acto hand crank pencil sharpener in the shop, and you can see from these points on these pencils that they are pretty sharp coming out of the pencil sharpener itself. For a long time, I just had whatever pencil sharpener I could get at my local stationery store, and that's when I started. Well, I've always sharpened with a chisel, because that way, if you're on a job site or doing something quick that you need to sharpen up a pencil, you can just grab a chisel and make it sharp rather rapidly. All right, so, but I have the like I said, it's made by X-Acto, and it's a pretty good sharpener. They do sharpen up fairly. Had it in here now for 4 or 5 years, and it still sharpens fairly well. All right. What else was in there? Oh. Frank from Syracuse finally remembered to catch this live. That's awesome. It's glad those weekly reminder emails are working. What's with calling them lead pencils when they were really graphite used to scare me when I was a little kid, because I heard that they were dangerous. Yeah, well, they stopped using lead in there once they kind of figured out that you get lead poisoning. All right, so we've done the marking. We're going to do a little bit of measuring stuff here real quick. And those are, when I went over those marking implements, I went over them kind of in the order that I tend to use them. I tend to use pencils more than anything. The awl, I think I grab, probably the second most, and the last thing is the marking knife. I'm not a huge marking knife fan. That's personal preference. I know a lot of people that if they marked out their dovetails using pencils, they would spend 3 days paring them in until they fit. But if you let them use a marking knife, they come right off the saw and they're perfect. So I've got 3 different types of measuring implements here. Your standard kind of a ruler, rule, a folding rule, and a tape measure. And I know there's a lot of people out, and then I've got some vernier calipers in the back here. So these are all things that I have in various sizes in the shop. The one thing I can tell you is I tend to use the tape measures for longer dimensions. If I'm really trying to plot things out, I tend to use either a 6-inch rule or some of the larger straight edge rules that were hanging on that board behind me. There's a 12-inch, but I also have a 2-foot and a 3-foot straight edge from that company. They are fairly well marked out. The big thing that I want, and then the folding rule I use to check cases for square, and I don't actually use the markings on the ruler at all, because each line on this thing tends to be between a 32nd and a 16th of an inch thick. So being able to measure things accurately with it is pretty bad. But if I open it up and I hook one end inside of a case, I can extend the little 6-inch extension on here until it gets into the corner of the other side. Then I can just hold it in place and then switch to the opposite diagonal. And I don't even have to know what the dimension is. I just know whether this thing fits the same way or not. I can easily tell, oh, this is sticking over 1/8 of an inch. I know I have to move in one direction. And if you're unsure how to do that, I think I covered that in the clamping video a while back, how to square things up. So to me, this is more sort of like I mean, you can do the same exact thing. In fact, I think I did in the video. I just used a pair of sticks and clamped it together. This is just a little more convenient. When you open it up, you can slide that 6-inch section out and tell whether or not the diagonals are the same. If I was going to lay out a project or work on a project, if I start with the tape measure for a specific operation, then I'm using that specific tape measure through the entire project. Same thing with my rule. If I'm going to use my 6-inch rule for a specific operation, if I'm going to lay out dovetails, that's the ruler that I use throughout that entire process. It doesn't necessarily mean if I'm building a spice box that I'm going to use the 6-inch rule from start to finish. What it means is for a specific operation, I'm not going to bounce back and forth between these two, nor am I going to switch up for a different ruler because, and I know this will make some people mad, rulers vary. I remember people getting very angry. They do not change. They are exactly the same. And the answer is, if I were to open this tape measure up and put this ruler on there, I've got equal chance of it matching up 16th by 16th as I do with it not matching. And even within tape measures, if I'm using this particular one, I use it for everything in that operation. If I'm cutting parts for a door, for a spice box, say, and I start to measure with this, I'm not switching tape measures in the process, and I'm not switching from brand to brand, and I'm not switching from this to a straight edge rule, because there could be variations. And 16 inches on this may not equal 16 inches on a 2-foot rule. And it certainly might even, and this particular brand and model tape measure, I bought half a dozen or a dozen of them at a time to help avoid some of that. The chances of them varying that much from tape measure to tape measure is reduced if I can buy them in a lot, because when the manufacturers package those things, they're coming usually out of a single run and being packaged together, which means the markings on the tape measure are fairly consistent from tape measure to tape measure. That said, if it's something like fitting a door, I'm measuring with a single tape measure or a single ruler all the way through that process, because the last thing I need to measure is 12 inches on one rule, and on the next rule, that 12 inches is 1/8 of an inch shorter than the 12 inches on the first rule. If you stick with the same brand, the markings are fairly consistent, unless you're buying the $1.95 tape measures at the dollar store. Which, why would things be more than $1 at the dollar store? All right, just checking. Yeah, right, Dave. Even two tape measures. Do you always use story sticks for furniture builds? And have you used, or do you use story sticks from woodpeckers? And the answer is, I always do some kind of a drawing, whether it is a story stick, a layout stick, whatever you want to call it. I think I did a video on that. If I didn't, I'll add it to the list. It's hard to remember. We start to get more of these under our belt. That's why I have a list, and I check it off every week as I go. I may not check it before I come in front of the camera, particularly if I'm in here with a class. I may forget to check what next week's is. However, I did have a class today, and I did check what's happening for next week. So I do use layout sticks. I make them. I've never used a commercial thing, so I don't have any of the Woodpeckers ones. I'm sure that, they have their uses, and I'm sure they're a quality product. I haven't seen too many products that have come out of Woodpeckers that I would say don't meet the quality level that I'm used to. I wish they made pencils. Although they were for a while there. They had mechanical pencils, which that's something I don't use a lot of. But I know a lot of woodworkers that's exclusively what they use. I don't have anything against them other than usually the leads are so fine that I just continually break them, and that just annoys me. So that's why I went to the regular number 3s. So tape measures. Straight rulers, we want to make sure we're using them consistently throughout a process. Okay, vernier calipers. Let's talk real quick about those. Or I feel like every time Rich says every time I go to Home Depot, every time I'm at Home Depot, I buy a tape ruler. Yeah, well, that just means everything is different. If you were taking a trip and wanted to do some woodworking elsewhere, but minimal luggage, what would you bring? That's a good topic for another day. And I can actually show you that. I have a travel case. Troy says, do you then not use your table saw rule when finishing like doors? So that's another predicament. If I'm using my tape measure to measure the door, then what I need to do is make sure that the scale on my table saw is calibrated to the tape measure that I use. And that's another reason why I bought all of the same brand, all of the same model at the same time tape measure. And usually when I'm making something, I will double check if I measure 12 inches with my tape measure and I set my scales on my table saw to 12 inches, either whether it's on the stop on the miter gauge or the rip fence, I will test it and check it with the tape measure to make sure it's still coming up at 12 inches here. If it isn't, I'll modify the scale. All the scales on my table saw are adjustable. No matter which table saw I'm using, whether it's the hammer, the slider, or the Powermatic 66. So if I'm going to do that, and I find that there's a situation where the tape measure and the scale vary, I can either continue to measure everything with the tape measure on my table saw, or I can turn around and adjust the scale so that it matches the tape measure. Hope that works. Rich says woodpeckers are expensive. Yeah, but it's like any really good tool that you buy. When we get into squares here in a second, you're going to see, you buy a Starrett square, it's expensive. You buy a woodpecker square, it's expensive. You buy an Empire square from Home Depot, it's inexpensive. Doesn't mean it's not square. It just means it's probably not going to stay square as long as the others. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too. I saw that Frank Bodner was here. Woodpeckers isn't expensive. They're a pricey luxury that I'm not sure would make me a better woodworker. Um, yeah, to some extent, that could possibly be. Um, that could be a consideration. It's not, none of these tools substitute good technique, which we're going to get into here shortly. For marking, measuring, all of those things, the thing that they do is if you do things properly, they will stay straight, they'll stay square, and they'll stay accurate a whole lot longer than far less expensive items. So Frank, I found that the tips of tape measures get rounded, which can change the measurement by a small amount. Right. So he's talking about the hook on there can kind of bend over and cause problems measuring, which is why when we get to the demo part of this, I very seldom ever measure from the end of my tape. So I'll show you that stuff here in a few minutes. I'm not sure what your name there is, I fail, but so when they buy their tapes, they take a 1, 2, 3 block and check all the tapes and make sure they're all the same and accurate. That's fine. Tim says he's been using Pica Dry pencils for a couple of years now and loves them. The pencils are in a plastic sleeve, which present breaking in your. Oh, that's nice. And Skip says a FOG member took 2 identical LS Starrett tape measures and ran them out for comparison. I don't recall how many inches out where they became quite clear the identical. More text. He's still typing, folks. There we go. I'll have to try those. I haven't tried the Pica pencils. I'm not really sure. This was my primary vernier caliper throughout most of my career. I don't really care about the scale. If I'm measuring something and I'm comparing it to something else, I sort of put it on there until it fits. And now I can go measure the other thing and check it the same dimension. I've locked it so that it can't, if I drop this thing on the floor, chances are it's not going to change on me. And the only reason that I've changed, just kicked my stool over there. I've changed to a digital in recent years simply because the digital readouts on some of my hammer equipment are pretty accurate. So if I can, if I zero this out and check something and it says it's a 1/2 inch, I can dial the digital counter on my hammer equipment right to 1/2 inch and start to make things identical to that dimension. Or if I'm running it through the planer, I know where to start. And if I want to take 1/2 thou or 3 thou or 1.5 inches off of something, I can do that pretty accurately. Okay. All right. So again, I'm not using the vernier calipers for the most part as a measuring tool. I'm using them more like an outside caliper would be used on a lathe, where you don't actually need the scale. And that's the other thing is, if I go back to the tape measures and stuff, lots of people who have recently taken classes with me have been doctors of one flavor or another, doctors, dentists, all of those things sort of fall into that same thing. And they are constantly like, well, you need to go to metric instead because it's just so much easier to measure than it is with Imperial? And the answer to that is the lines on here and the number of them is fairly irrelevant. The big thing is when I know if I have 16 markings here, in an inch, 8 of them make it half. I've got 7/16 on either side of that. If I have 10 markings on there, do the math. I saw Skip came up with a second thing. Tick marks were increasingly out of sync. Imagine that from LS there. Guess they should stick to machinist tools. Yeah, you think their machinist tools are any more accurate than that? That's the only question I've got for you. Starrett is a great company. I'm not going to badmouth them. They make a lot of tremendous products. I've never bought any of their tape measures, but again, I don't really care about the markings on there and what numbers there are, and that's why. And Skip's example is the perfect reason why. If I start measuring case parts to cut up with this ruler, that's what I'm using all the way through. And then like I said, when I go to the table saw, I either have to, if I measure 12 inches with this and I test it on the table saw and it comes up an 11/15/16, then when I set the stops or the rip fence on my table saw, I have to adjust for that so that I come up with the proper size. If I'm making a door and I measure 12 with my tape and my saw comes up with 11/15/16, there's going to be a problem fitting this thing. It's just not going to work. So you've got a couple of multiple options. I also have, which I forgot to bring over, I have some double squares. So I've got sort of the engineer square type thing. These are the two that I use the most, combination squares, and I have a couple of different combination squares here, a woodpecker's one and a Starrett one. I've also got 12-inch versions of these. I've never broken down and gotten a 24-inch rule for my Starrett squares or an 18-inch rule, something like that, because, well, they're expensive. I tend to lean more towards the engineer square, just a tri-square kind of a thing, simply because if I don't need to continually move that the blade around, there's no reason why I shouldn't use a tri-square of the proper length. The big thing about these, because that blade is movable, that's the mechanism that is slowly going to wear out over time. And that's what's going to cause this thing to modify whether it's really square or not. Usually tri-squares stay pretty square unless you're dropping them on the floor all the time. And that's really going to get us close to that whole demonstration part of this when I start to show you some of the tips that I have for marking, and whether it's measuring a specific size or marking here. One of the things that I want to show you, and I guess I could show you that now, is how I check my squares for square. So if I slide these out of the way, and again, some of these are better at some things than others. I don't really, I don't use the positive stops really on the woodpecker's indexable head that much. And because I don't use a mechanical pencil, I don't take advantage of the little marks in there that I can use to draw parallel lines as much as I should. That said, the Starrett was the one that I had for the longest time, because when I started in this was the only thing on the market that had any guaranteed accuracy. And we'll check it for square here in a second. you know, and it comes with one of those removable little pins for scribing. Totally useless, and mine's pulled off in a drawer somewhere. One of the features that I really like about the Woodpeckers combination squares, and I'll bring a piece of wood up here. If I lay this on here and I'm holding it like this, I have a harder time keeping that square flat to the board. You know, it's just, and what Woodpeckers has done on their combination squares is they've added that little slidable foot. I can retract it and then extend it right out the side there, and now that thing kind of stays square. And as I move across here, it's easy to make my marks. I don't have to worry about this thing flopping over. Their tri-squares are pretty much the same. So this is when I first started in the business, the shop I was working in, everybody had bought these, their English machinist squares that Woodcraft used to sell when they sold lots of other brands, and they were very accurate, and so I instantly ran out and got it because I just liked the way they work, and the fact that they were super accurate, and they weren't, you know, $150 for a little tri-square. What I don't like, again, is that same thing where if I'm holding it, the weight of the foot of the square is twisting that thing on the board. And all of Woodpecker's stuff will just sort of support itself. You can see I'm not touching that thing at all. So I really like that. Expensive wood, I'm not sure. All right, so let's show you real quick a couple of things. So I just saw that John said something about burning 10 inches. So that's a really good plan there. So if I show this, if I line up my 10-inch mark with the end of my board and I want to mark something, grab a pencil, and I say I want to put a mark at 4 inches. Pretty easy. 10 plus 4 is 14, right? I had an apprentice one time who shall remain nameless forever. And he would always hold 1 inch, and he would go, okay, let's cut it at 4. So he would mark 4, and then he would go cut it off, and it would always be 1 inch short. So burning 1 inch, it's easier to screw that up, especially on something long. You're holding 1 inch and you want to go out 29 inches, say. It's easy to just hold the 1, mark over, and hit the 29. If you're holding 10 and you mark 29, you need to pick up finger painting, because woodworking's probably not for you. So I put a little tick mark right at my 4-inch line. And if I want to square that line across that board, first of all, I'd never told you how to check this for square. We'll do that here right now, right at that 4-inch mark. The first thing I'm going to do is lay my square on there, and I'm going to put my pencil point right on that 4-inch tick mark and bring the square over to it. And now I can draw that line straight down, and I know I'm at the 4-inch line. To check my square for square, this is a known straight edge. I straightened it on my joiner, which I then checked with a known metal straight edge to make sure that it was straight. I've drawn that line with that square pointing off to my left. If I just flip it straight over, put my pencil point back on my 4-inch mark, bring it over here, and I draw it, and it doubles that line. It hasn't increased the width of the line. It drew right back on itself. If I really want to double check this, all I got to do is step off there about 1/16 of an inch, and then measure between those two pencil lines, And as long as it's parallel, which it is, I have a nice square square. If I do that with my combination square, this is my Starrett square, and this one's, well, it's, at this point, I think I got it in the late 80s. So if I hold that into place, I flip it over, it's falling exactly right on the same line. Okay, so that's generally how I check the squares for square. You could also, if you have a known square, you can nest them together and make sure there's no daylight. I remember when I first started in this business, one of the reasons why everybody was buying Starrett was because they told you could see, what was it, 20 thousandths gap if you hold it up to the light. That's smaller than most people can measure. Your eye will see the variation. So it really doesn't matter which square I grab. My squares are all nice. They all nest together nicely. I try not to drop them. I worked on concrete for decades, and these are the two of the first squares that I ever bought. They are still square. It inevitably will happen that you'll drop it. The big difference between this and, like I said, something like Empire or some of the ones that the big box stores sell, if I drop those, they're out of square before they've hit the floor. They just know they're headed there, so they go out of square. But these things are high quality tools. They are more expensive, but they're going to take the beating a whole lot more. So John says, do you like the support legs on the Woodpecker squares? So yeah, so I have a whole bunch of their tri-squares, or their versions of the engineer square. These, I find this part of it very useful when I'm doing this type of marking and measuring. If I'm checking something for square, I would rather have that retractable foot, because I find this, sort of narrow bearing surface to be a little bit off-putting for me. But again, that's personal choice. I mean, I love the squares themselves, and I tend to use this. I check my table saw miter gauge for square with the larger ones. I check band saws, joiner fences, everything with these things. And I'm just seeing a couple of dings on this back corner here where the aluminum is sort of raised up there. So I know that hit something hard at some point. They also get used by a lot of the students here too. So I'm not blaming everything on them. I'm sure I have dropped them once or twice. I try not to, but inevitably it happens. And Scary says, measure once, cut twice. Exactly. Wes thinks my eye is pretty good at seeing whether two close lines are parallel or not. I'll see if I can't hold this still enough in the light so that you guys can see it too. Let's zoom in a little. Is that fuzzy enough that you can't see it? Because that's the important thing. Is if I say it's parallel, remember the line, this line over here, I traced that off 3 or 4 times. The one on my left, over here, was a single stroke with that same thing, and it's pretty easy to tell that it's pretty parallel. Here's the other thing. We tend if you're making, we tend to be a little over zealous in our dimensioning of things. If you're measuring this at 4 inches and it's a 32nd of an inch off, unless you're trying to fit it between something tightly. If this was a case side for a drawer side or a drawer front or something like that, first of all, I have the grain oriented wrong, but let's say I was cutting it off 4 inches as a drawer part. Whether it was really 4 inches or if it was 3 31/32, it is fairly irrelevant. It's not if I'm making one of something, the amount of variation that I can accept when measuring something and try to compensate for as I go through. If you're making a case, a cabinet, wall cabinet, or a chest of drawers or something like that, and you cut one case side off a quarter of an inch short, cut the other one off to match it. You're not trying to match another. You only need the left and right sides to match. You don't need, I drew it out at 36 and I cut it at 35 3/4. Do I throw it away? That brings up, years ago when I was at the woodworking show, it was early on doing them. I was taking furniture to the shows and I had someone come in and he's like, "Oh, you have tall case clocks here. You obviously know how to make them. You've made a couple and they're here at the show. Maybe you can help me with this. I bought a set of plans and it says that middle door that you open up for winding this thing for the weights and all that kind of stuff. It says on the plans the door is supposed to be 36, and I measure my drawer opening and I get my door opening and I get 36.5. What do I do? If you don't make your door 36.5, you're going to have a gap where you don't want it. There you go, Tim's close enough for woodworking, right? So if I measure that, and I'm sure I could take a steel rule, measure that thing, and come up with exactly how far it is apart all the way up there. But that's what I'm trying to get at. Even if I were to lay my square on there and it were off the thickness of the pencil line, what are we talking about? 2-3 thousandths? I know that'll drive Skip crazy because he gets nuts when we start talking about fitting doors and off a few thou. All right. There was something else I wanted to do here. Yep. What I do like to do with my combination squares is sometimes I will draw parallel lines. And again, I'll do my measurement the same way. Hold my 10, measure up, and come in here. That's awesome. And it doesn't matter. I've always done that regardless of which combination square I have. But what I really like to do that with, and I think I had them all out today, so I may not have one here. Yes, I did. Woodpeckers makes those Paolini rules. And I don't know what I did with all of mine, but they have a little notch in the end. There we go. You guys can't see it, but I'm wandering around the shop at the moment trying to find what I did with my rules. So this is one of the things that I really like that they make. It's the Paolini rule. Greg Paolini, I guess, helped them design this thing. If I set it at 2, it's going to be really hard unless I zoom in on it a lot more. Which, I have the technology, so I ought to. I'm not sure if you can see the notch. Yeah, you can see a little black line right there in the middle. And what that does, it's a tiny little V, and my pencil point sticks right in it. So if I set my ruler at 2 inches, and then it's got this neat little fence that locks on there, I can take that, if I'm not trying to hold the board and move the pencil at the same time, I can draw a nice parallel line to my edge using the fence as a guide along that piece. And I like the fact that it's got the notch in there. What I find is I tend to lean towards using those Paolini rules more often than a combination square at this point, simply because the combination squares, whether they're the woodpeckers ones or the Starrett ones, don't have that notching, and I really, really like it. It doesn't. It's not enough of a notch to make the measurement off, but it's just enough of a notch that it catches the end of your pencil, and you're not coming across and then scribbling off on the side like always happens. So, all right. So, marking gauges, and I went looking for one of my wooden traditional marking gauges, and I can't find it. So it's hidden probably in a toolbox or a bag somewhere. Maybe I took it to some other place for a demo or something. But I've really sort of moved away from, this is a reproduction one that a group of us made when I worked at Irian Furniture. It's a copy of an original Stanley, and Lou Irian had the original Stanley one. So one of the guys, his wife was a sculptor, and she did a lot of bronzes, and he helped us figure out how to make the molds from the original, and then we cast these parts up and worked them up by hand, because bronze is easily worked with files and drilled with normal tools. It's not like we were casting this thing out of steel or something like that, where we had to, get into a, high temperature crucible or anything like that. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to zoom in and effectively show you. We used a drill bit for the pin. And what I did was I filed it to a knife edge. Let's see if I can pull in there. Get it in focus, will you? I'll back up a tiny bit. There we go. Now you can see it. If you're looking at that pin on that bronze piece, not that one, you can see it's kind of vertical. If I turn it this way, you can't see it at all because it gets lost in the background. So let's take the fence off of there if I can, or at least move it far enough out of the way. So again, it was just a drill bit. The corkscrew end we cut off, and then I rounded this off a little bit so that it wasn't as sharp. Once again, just sort of beveled that up to a point only in two dimensions there. So it's beveled on these two sides, but it's not a cone shape. It now forms a knife edge. So if I put that back together, and then I show you how this works, it's better than the standard pin, which was just a cone shape. The pin, if I were to drag it, is going to leave a surface kind of like that, right? So because this is sharpened more to a knife edge, if I take it and I tilt it slightly away from me, now I get a nice clean line. No tear out. It's severing the fibers nicely, which is really seriously important when we really start to look at layout lines and things like that for dovetailing, marking mortise and tenons, all of those things. To me, that the crisper and cleaner that line is, the more accurately I can cut to the line. And that brings me to why I really have sort of switched over to these disc style marking gauges. I know my friend Bob Van Dyke is not really a fan of these. He's never really given me a reason why. other than the fact that he's a curmudgeon and he's old and he has to use those other, no, he uses slicing gauges that he makes, which are great. They function more like what I've got here, which is, it's like having a knife edge that he takes a piece of card scraper stock and basically makes a V and sharpens both sides so that it's more like the knife point on that marking knife I showed you to begin with. It's only beveled on one side. And that way, no matter which way you go, you get a nice clean line. And that's what he's using in his marking gauges that he makes. For a lot of years, I had one of these. I have a bunch of these Veritas ones. They're inexpensive by comparison. The thing that got me hooked on them was I was at a show. I did a dovetail demo, and after I got done doing it, I asked if any volunteers wanted to come up and try it. And all of the adults sort of started looking at their shoes, and about a 10 or 12-year-old kid raised his hand and said, "I'd like to try." So I brought him up, and I'm like, "Okay, so we've set this to the right dimension. You have to scribe this across the end." And he grabbed that thing in his fist. Let me back up. Let me get the remote. There we go. He grabbed it in his fist, and he just scrubbed that thing just like that. And now I can zoom back in on that stuff. And what you're going to see is that scrub line that I just made right there is absolutely perfectly clean end to end. So that was the selling point for me, was that thing, as long as the carbide disc on the end doesn't get nicked, it's an awesome thing. It's sharp. It stays sharp. I've seen a lot of the Chinese knockoffs, and the blades aren't as sharp. The locking mechanisms don't hold as well. People drift. I don't know what Veritas is selling these for now. They used to be about $35 to $40 or something like that. Who knows what the current price is? But if you're buying one for $12.95, you've bought a really good paperweight. Those are the ones that were having the problems keeping sharp and keeping their setting. So to me, it's definitely worth spending a little bit more money and at least stepping up to the Veritas ones. They do have some drawbacks. This disc makes it hard for me if I'm doing half blind dovetails in a drawer with a lip. I can't mark with this because this hits the back of the rabbet for the lip long before the cutter hits the inside of the drawer. So at that point, I have to either break out the repro, or I would have to modify one of those and grind one side flat on this that's small enough that I could get down in there and not hit the back of the lip. At some point in the last couple of years, I had watched Matt Bickford come here to teach his molding plane class multiple times, and he was a super tight mark fan. And what I found was once I tried this, that I really liked the ability to have that double lock on there. Again, not that I was having trouble with the Veritas ones adjusting, but I just felt like if I set it down, I don't have to worry about it bumping and moving even a little bit. The other thing that I really liked was the micro adjust on this. If I loosen that front knob, I can really finely adjust that distance over a pretty decent sized distance. I'm not sure if Kevin Glendrake is the guy who started making these. I don't know if Kevin's still making them. They used to be available through Tools for Working Wood, I believe, and Lee Nielsen and a couple of other places. I tried to get on to Kevin's website, and it looks like it's straight out of the 70s, and I'm not sure it isn't the 1870s. So I'm not sure if and Kevin wasn't a young man a long time ago, so I don't know if they're still making them or if somebody else is making them. There we go. Frank already looked it up. Good. BVD is a bit stubborn on this issue, not just this issue. But that's a different story. So, I say that with love because I know that he's not watching, but Doug is. And all right, so yeah, they can get microchips in them, but you can buy those replacement blades for the Lee Valley ones. They're only a few bucks. I was buying like a dozen at a time, just to have them on hand in case somebody dropped one of these things, or you're working at the bench and somebody whacks it with the hammer or a mallet or something, and the thing goes flying and chips this thing. I still have a bunch because I've never used all of them. These are a little bit more because they're shouldered, so I don't really have a whole lot of extra of the ones for the tight marks. And again, I can just scrub that thing and come up with an absolutely clean line. And that to me was the total selling point on those things. Okay, we'll see that. I was going to say, and Frank pointed out that the $550 each for the replacement blades. Yep. So I think they were $350 when I bought them last, and like I said, I think I bought a dozen of them because it was like like $40. I mean, short of that, I was paying more for shipping than I was for the parts. So maybe I wouldn't buy a dozen now at $550, but I'd probably buy half a dozen anyway to have them around. Douglas wants me to do any tips for drill press measuring for depth. You don't have a depth stop on your old Delta. I tell you what, why don't I'm going to throw something in about drill presses and things that we can mess around with there. So we've talked about a couple of quick tips for how to check your square, how to work that marking gauge and stuff like that. One of the things that we did not talk about is being able to take a straight edge, and we've gone long, and I want to try and wrap this up pretty quickly. So if I take a known straight edge, I can do multiple things with it. Not only can I measure things and I can check and see if things are straight, but I can also check this to make sure it's flat. And the way that I do that is I take that known straight edge and I measure across, I lay it straight across there. I'm not paying attention to the markings at this point. What I'm going to do is get down to the raking light and see, do I see daylight between this edge and my board? I'm going to measure from corner to corner. I'm going to go all the way across the length of this board and across the width of this board. And I'm going to check it the whole way. And if I don't see any direction, any light in any direction, I know I have a flat surface. Real quick, bevel squares or sliding T-bevels or just a bevel in general. I tend to use this particularly when I'm laying out for dovetails far more than I would those marking saddles. I've never really been a huge fan of those things. They're single-use tools. I can take this and I can set an angle to anything that I want. I can go over to the joiner and set the fence. I can go over to the table saw, set the blade. I can use it if I set it like this. I can work with it this way. or that way to draw in dovetails or any angle that I'm looking for. What I look for in these things, when I tighten it up, does it slide around? If it slides around, go find another one that doesn't. That's not to say that you have to buy one of those. I mean, I have Woodpeckers ones, and I've got a couple of others that are fairly expensive. But I've also got some old Stanleys that I found at tool sales and auctions and things like that. And once you tighten that thing up, it doesn't move. I probably have a dozen of these things floating around, different sizes, because you can never have too many bevels. Again, we're going to mark with those pretty much the same way we did with the square. Plot our point, set the pencil, bring the bevel over to it. Another thing that I find useful in the shop for marking and measuring is a compass, or multiple compasses, compi. I'm not sure what the plural is. Yes, I am. And yes, this is a compass. It's like a trammel point. Okay. I have this because I have yet to find what I feel is an acceptable. I mean, this is a fairly decent compass that Veritas makes, I believe. Doesn't say Veritas on it, so maybe Lee Valley just sells it. It tends to lock fairly well, but even here, I get a little wiggle out of the pencil that fits in there. And that's really what I've been looking for, is a good loose leg divider, for lack of a better term, that when I lock a pencil in there, it stays nice and rigid and doesn't change, because when it starts to wiggle like that inside that housing, that's when you get varying radii when you're starting to mark things. So quite often I have just a piece of, well, this is 200-year-old yellow pine, so you can see how dense, if the annual growth rings are on that thing. And the way that I set it is I'll hold it in place and clamp a pencil into place. And the only thing you really have to worry about is you do get a little tiny wiggle out of it. So it's no worse off than either of these. This, you don't have to worry so much about the lead or the graphite wiggling, but these are a drafting compass, and they tend to wear down pretty quickly. And what I find is I just tend to, the tips break off on the pivoting point, the graphite wears down too quickly, and the diameter that I'm able, or the radius that I'm able to swing is pretty limited. This thing, I mean, I've got some of these sticks here that are, one end has a nail driven through it. The other end I clamp on a pencil if I'm desperate to make sure that it stays in its place. I have even taken a carving gouge and gone across some of the sticks to put a notch if I know that that's a repetitive dimension that I want to make. So I'll lock the pencil in that way, or I'll use a more rigid clamp than a little spring clamp. And I get a variety of, if I make a stick that's 10 feet long, I can do up to 20-foot diameter circles, which is kind of, that's just a standard divider that I've got here. And I've got these in a bunch of different sizes. I tend to use these less than I ever did before. Sometimes what I tend to use the divider for is to divide things up. So if I'm carving a fan or a shell, I will plot out each lobe of the piece and step it off all the way around so that I end up with uniform lobes on the shell or any of those kinds of things. But I do not necessarily, I'm not scribing arcs with these and those kind of things because the legs tend to flex a fair amount, which again changes and gives you a lot of variation in your radii. Real quick, the last two things, because we're already an hour and 10 minutes. At least that's what the timer is telling me. Last couple of things that I have is I tend to keep a couple of circle templates around. I tend to mark things and strike arcs with a compass, usually, but it's useful to have circle templates simply because I can center these things up on the end of a blank and draw the circle that I want to get, particularly if I'm going to, if I'm going to throw the thing in the lathe. It's easy to line the centers up with my little plastic crosshairs, you know, plastic template with the crosshairs on it. Sometimes for carvings and things like that, I'll lay things out using a circle template. Usually I lay it out with a compass. So what else did I not cover that I wanted to cover? Yeah, varies. You're correct. They do. Yes. Red Rose Reproductions does make some great. I'm going to switch cameras because I think that's all I have for this. The small stuff here, you know, the close-up stuff. So now you just get to look at me because we all know that's why you're here. I think I've covered all that stuff. So I got everything here. Now my bench is a mess. Red Rose Reproductions does make some stuff. They do make a sector. The sector is really good for proportioning things. That's a whole different kind of a show, though. Particularly since we've been going for over an hour as it is. I don't need this open anymore. It's just in the way. You know, the key is when you buy your marking and measuring tools, to me, the most expensive things that I'm going to spend my money on are my squares because, like I said before, the chances of them being out of square when you buy them are slimmer than if you buy something at a discount. That doesn't mean that, you know, a $10 or $20 square can't be square. It just means that the likelihood that it won't be is a little greater. There are ways to make these things square. Probably a topic for another show, although I don't really have any that aren't square, so I'm not sure that I would want to make one out of square just so I could show you how I would make it square. They usually involve some kind of punching or hitting something with a hammer in a certain way to realign it to square. I'm just, like I said, I'm just trying to make sure. I thought there were more things that I wanted to cover, but I can't recall at the moment because we're all this far in. We've done a lot of talking. Yes, Red Rose has 2 different size dividers. Vincent says Bob Van Dyke would say that you can go from one point to another with a traditional style gauge while you can't do that with a wheel. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, but if I were to mark, and I could switch back over to my other camera for this, but let's say I wanted to go from this point to that point, and I think I will switch back over here. It'll take 2 minutes to do this. We're already long Just get it on. Get over with it. All right. Camera. There we go. So I've just put 2 marks on this board. If I grab my type mark, which is a wheel type marking gauge, I can start at one point and go to another and come to a complete stop at those 2 points. Okay. So I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, Vincent. Hopefully that sort of, hopefully I hit it right. Troy said he just bought Red Rose, not sure if it wiggles. I would bet not. Their dividers are pretty sweet. I'm kind of hoping that they will be at the Hearn Hardwoods open house towards the end of next month, because I'll be there at least on Friday. It looks like there might be a family thing on Saturday that I'm not going to be able to miss. So I will probably only be there Friday, unless something dramatic changes here in the next 4 or 6 weeks, whatever it is. Oh, I either went under or over, BVD would say. Well, no, just no. He and Bob may have, there may be a point there, but there's no real reason that I've seen that I have to go from I mean, I'm sure at some point in my career I had to go between 2 points. I'm not sure that sort of negates the idea of how easy the wheel marking gauges are. They have they're beveled. Those cutters are beveled on the inside towards the fence. So when you start to work with it, it naturally pulls the fence tighter to the work, which is something a little different than you're going to get with a traditional marking gauge. And Bob's got his points, and I'm sure when I see him here in a couple of weeks, I'll bring it up and find out what his thoughts really are on that. I just know that you have to try and defend your other teacher. I'm not really sure that you have to defend Bob. No one else does. Oh, thank you, Skip. The other Skip said, he really got good information out of this. So, yep, we are winding here to a very slow and rambling end. So I'm just going to kill it before it kills itself. So hopefully we've got some things here. If you have any questions and you're watching this on YouTube, please, number one, like the video, hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, get the notifications. If you have questions or things that I didn't cover in this, just make a mention of it down in the comments section. If you're watching this on Facebook, head on over to YouTube. You could also leave a comment on Facebook. I do get those. Again, if you aren't already, go to the website, sign up for the newsletter. You'll get that email newsletter every week telling you what tonight's session is going to be about. If that's all, we'll see you next Tuesday at 8 o'clock. And we're going to do something on scratch stocks. If you don't know what they are, they're a really cool, simple tool that you'll be able to make in your own shop. So next week, 8 o'clock Tuesday, and we will talk about scratch stocks. So thanks for watching. Thanks for tolerating me for all this time. Everybody, I hope you have a great week. See you next Tuesday.